The Imperial Navy was not born of a single moment, but slowly and violently emerged from the long millennia that saw humanity claw its way across the stars. Its origins stretch back to the earliest days of the Age of Technology, when man's ambition outpaced his ability to control it. During this golden era, powerful interstellar vessels were built by the ancestors of the Adeptus Mechanicus and deployed by the techno-oligarchs who ruled Earth and its colonies. These fleets served mercantile and exploratory purposes at first, but eventually evolved into the war fleets that safeguarded trade routes, defended planetary interests, and annihilated threats. These proto-fleets were not yet unified or coordinated, and their commanders operated independently under fractured jurisdictions. It wasn't until the rise of the Emperor and the Great Crusade that these disparate naval elements were forcibly merged into a single coordinated entity under Imperial command. The conquest of humanity required more than ground troops. It required control of void space itself. By the closing years of the 31st millennium, the Imperial Navy was formalized as a separate branch of the Imperium's military machine. Unlike the Space Marine legions, which often fought independently and landed on planets to secure territory, the Imperial Navy's mandate was the control, deployment, and operation of all major void-faring vessels, particularly those involved in interstellar warfare, orbital superiority, and logistical command. Though originally referred to as the Navis Imperialis, the Navy was reorganized and renamed after the Horus Heresy, when the Imperium's armed forces were split to prevent any one entity from holding too much power. The Departmentum Munitorum, working with the Adeptus Administratum, enacted reforms that divided the Imperium's military into the Imperial Guard and the Imperial Navy. While the Guard would fight on land, the Navy would command the stars. This division of labour became institutional and remains in place even in the 41st millennium. Over time, the Imperial Navy evolved into a sprawling, bureaucratic and heavily stratified organisation, one that mirrored the wider Imperium itself, slow-moving, suspicious, and obsessed with tradition, yet still terrifying in scale and destructive capacity. The Imperial Navy is a hammer the size of a solar system, wielded with an iron fist by admirals who answer only to their segmentum lords and, in rare cases, the High Lords of Terror themselves. The scale of the Navy is impossible to quantify with exact numbers due to its size and complexity. It is estimated to command tens of thousands of void-capable warships, with each segmentum fleet maintaining its own assets, orbital docks, patrol schedules, and systems of logistics. These fleets include battleships, cruisers, carriers, frigates, escort squadrons, and specialized vessels like troop transports, asteroid fortresses, and heavy ordnance platforms. A single battleship can exceed 20 kilometers in length, bristling with macro cannons, lance batteries, torpedo bays, and hangar decks. Its crew alone can number in the hundreds of thousands, with most never seeing the stars beyond their ship's interior. Unlike the vessels of the Adeptus Astartes, which are few in number but devastatingly elite, the Imperial Navy's ships are designed to operate in massive formations, blanketing entire systems in firepower. Planetary blockades, orbital bombardments, fleet engagements, and long-range warp insertions all fall under the Navy's doctrine. Their goal is simple and brutally efficient: control the void, suppress resistance, and deliver the Imperium's will through superior firepower and overwhelming presence. Recruitment into the Navy follows one of three major paths. The first is through generational naval dynasties, where service is inherited and entire families live aboard ships or orbital platforms. The second is through planetary tithes, where worlds assigned to the Navy's jurisdiction are required to supply crew, officers, and specialists at regular intervals. The third is through the Schola Progenium, where orphans of Imperial servants are trained to become officers, void masters, or commissars. Training is rigorous, brutal, and deeply indoctrinated. Officers are expected to understand void combat, logistics, warp navigation, and command hierarchies with precision. Life aboard a Navy vessel is harsh and unforgiving. Crew members may never set foot on a planet for decades, and the conditions within the hull, mechanical, dangerous, and deeply hierarchical, breed rigid discipline and suspicion. Punishments are severe and frequent. Mutiny is a constant fear, and the threat of psychic phenomena or warp breaches means that spiritual paranoia is institutionalized. Every deck has shrines. Every mission begins with rites. Every weapon is sanctified by a tech priest before use. The Navy's culture is a mixture of militarized superstition, bureaucratic rigidity, and proud tradition. Ships are considered sacred vessels, often thousands of years old and passed from one generation of officers to the next. Commanders will perform rituals to appease the ship's machine spirit, and even low-ranking crewmen may wear charms, relics, or purity seals to protect against malfunctions or warp incursions. Officers and crew rarely interact directly, and a strict caste system exists aboard all vessels. The lower decks are populated by ratings and indentured crew who perform the physical labour of running the ship, from loading munitions to maintaining plasma coils. Above them are the mid-deck supervisors, gunnery sergeants, and void hands. The command deck is occupied by the bridge crew, officers, and the ship's captain. Each ship may also host members of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Adeptus Ministorum, and, when required, the Inquisition. Tensions between these groups are frequent but expected. The leadership of the Navy is structured according to a rigid chain of command. At the lowest level are the ship captains and their command crews. Above them are squadron commanders, battle fleet admirals, and segmentum-level fleet lords. In exceptional cases, certain admirals are granted the title of Lord High Admiral and given command over entire sectors or even segmentums. The ultimate authority rests with the Master of the Fleet, based on Terra, who serves as the Navy's representative among the High Lords of Terra. This position is as political as it is martial. It involves the allocation of resources, the arbitration of interfleet disputes, and the alignment of the Navy's goals with those of the Imperium at large. While command is technically centralized, actual operational control is decentralized across segmentum boundaries, allowing for regional adaptation and autonomy. This structure enables the Navy to function across the entire Imperium, even when long-range communication is disrupted by warp storms or enemy activity. The Navy's technological philosophy is rooted in redundancy, scale, and ritual maintenance. Ships are constructed using arcane designs preserved by the Adeptus Mechanicus, with blueprints that date back to the Dark Age of technology. Every vessel is built to endure centuries of use, outfitted with massive plasma reactors, layered void shields, and hundreds of weapons batteries. Interiors are Gothic, cluttered, and industrial, often resembling cathedrals filled with cables, bulkheads, and alcoves. Elevators may take hours to traverse the length of a battleship, and entire crew sections may live and die without ever seeing the bridge. Maintenance is performed not just with tools but with incense, blessings, and standardized catechisms. The relationship between crew and ship is not purely technical, it is spiritual. If a torpedo bay misfires or a Gela field flickers, the crew is more likely to pray than troubleshoot. Each warship within the Imperial Navy functions as both a weapon and a society unto itself. Its systems are not only vast but often poorly understood, relying on a mixture of technical knowledge and inherited rituals to keep them running. Because most crew are never formally educated beyond their specific duties, compartmentalization is extreme. A single deckhand might spend his entire life monitoring the temperature of a plasma conduit without ever seeing the outer hull of the ship. Specialist roles include void navigators, communications officers, munitions loaders, atmospheric regulators, and reactor technicians. In larger vessels, entire regiments of armsmen, naval soldiers trained for boarding actions and internal security, are maintained to prevent mutiny or repel invaders. Chaplains lead devotional sessions, while tech priests tend to the ship's machine spirit. Navigators of the Navis Nobilitae guide ships through the warp, using their psychic mutation to steer a path through the shifting tides of unreality. Astropaths maintain contact with other ships and distant stations by transmitting telepathic messages across the galaxy. Each ship is a crucible of personnel, faith, machine, and command. Among the most sacred rituals performed aboard Navy ships are those linked to warp travel. The warp is both necessary and perilous, offering faster-than-light travel at the cost of potential exposure to demons, psychic storms, and spatial anomalies. Before entering the warp, a ship undergoes days of preparation, including the invocation of protection rites, activation of Jella fields, and the solemn consent of the ship's navigator. The bridge crew operates in silence as coordinates are entered, warp drives engaged, and the vessel tears into unreality. Throughout the journey, the ship may experience visual and auditory hallucinations, equipment failures, or crew-wide anxiety. Warp breaches are rare but catastrophic, and entire vessels have been lost with no warning or explanation. Upon exiting the warp, successful re-entry is often greeted with prayer, celebration, or enforced silence, depending on the command crew's beliefs. Every warp journey is a gamble, and no two are the same. Despite their size and complexity, Imperial Navy vessels are not built for comfort or flexibility. Their designs prioritize durability, firepower, and intimidation. A single battleship may possess dozens of plasma batteries, hundreds of macro cannon emplacements, and multiple torpedo launch bays. The power needed to operate such systems is staggering, drawn from fusion reactors and redirected through kilometers of armored conduits. Weapons are often hardwired into the ship's core systems, requiring overlapping control protocols to prevent overload or malfunction. Gunners operate in shifts, with targeting data relayed from auger arrays and plotted against visual and psychic readings. A well-coordinated barrage can erase a city from orbit in minutes. The fear generated by the sight of an Imperial Navy fleet entering orbit is deliberate. It is psychological warfare by silhouette and scale. The Imperium wins many battles before a shot is fired. Not all vessels in the Navy serve frontline combat roles. Countless others function as support, logistics, or reconnaissance assets. Troop transports are configured to carry entire regiments of the Imperial Guard, deploying dropships and landers through gravitic descent bays. Hospital ships provide limited medical care under the supervision of the Adeptus Medici, though most crews fear them as places of quarantine and death. Monitor-class vessels and patrol ships are deployed along trade routes or planetary orbits to maintain order and deter piracy. Cargo freighters, refinery ships, and fuel haulers ensure that fleets remain supplied during long campaigns. Even larger are the forge ships operated jointly with the Adeptus Mechanicus, capable of producing munitions, performing large-scale repairs, and conducting arcane research. These support elements are vital, though they receive less glory, and are more likely to be abandoned or sacrificed in the face of strategic need. Famous ships and commanders have become legendary within the Navy and beyond. Admiral Spire of Battlefleet Gothic is remembered for his resistance against Abaddon, the despoiler during the Gothic War. His flagship, the Divine Right, became synonymous with loyalty and sacrifice. The Macragge's Honour, flagship of the Ultramarines, has served in numerous campaigns and often coordinates with Navy fleets during major crusades. The battleship Gauntlet of Wrath was instrumental in holding the Cadia system during its final defence. Other vessels, such as the Armageddon-class cruisers or Retribution-class battleships, have formed the backbone of countless Navy engagements across thousands of years. Some ships have such long histories that their origins are forgotten, their hulls carrying layers of battle damage, hasty repairs, and sacred relics. Others are lost in the warp for centuries, only to reappear bearing cryptic damage and unknown crew. Superstition and reverence are often the only responses available. The behaviour and instincts of Navy personnel are shaped by constant exposure to danger, repetition, and isolation. Crew members become hyper-disciplined, resistant to change, and deeply fatalistic. Jokes and rumours circulate below deck as a means of psychological survival. Officers often enforce discipline with severity, fearing that the smallest breach of protocol could cascade into catastrophe. Alcohol is banned or tightly regulated. Punishment is frequent and public. Executions for insubordination, heresy, or cowardice are common. At the same time, bonds of loyalty can form quickly under fire. A well-run ship becomes a hardened organism, functioning with brutal efficiency and collective purpose. Rivalries exist between ships, fleets, and officers, but they are almost always suppressed in favour of duty. The Imperium does not reward ambition unless it serves its survival. Rituals occupy every level of Navy life. The maintenance of a weapon may involve reciting litanies. The starting of a reactor is accompanied by a processional march. Promotions, punishments, and daily duties are carried out in accordance with ceremonial norms that vary slightly from ship to ship but always follow approved dogma. Chaplains read from the Imperial Creed, while tech priests offer binaric blessings in the name of the Omnissiah. The blending of religious reverence with military routine creates an atmosphere of constant tension and belief. Nothing is done casually. Every action has consequences, spiritual, technical, or lethal. It is not enough for the Navy to function. It must function the correct way. Failure to observe even the smallest rite is believed to endanger the ship and all aboard. The Imperial Navy's internal divisions and castes are rigid, multi-layered, and frequently invisible to those outside the organisation. At the base level are the ratings, unskilled or minimally trained crew responsible for basic ship operations. These include loading munitions, scrubbing decks, maintaining corridor pressure, or transporting equipment across kilometres of internal gangways. Ratings live in shared barracks that are cramped, unsanitary, and often located near hazardous areas like engine rooms or torpedo holds. Their lifespan is short. Many are conscripted against their will or born aboard ship and never know any other existence. Above the ratings are the petty officers and deck supervisors. These men and women enforce discipline, interpret orders, and manage specialized teams. Some rise from the ranks through performance or necessity. Others are inserted by command decisions or noble appointments. The command caste begins with the junior officers, ensigns, lieutenants, and watch commanders. These individuals often graduate from imperial academies, the Schola Progenium, or noble naval colleges. Their education includes tactical theory, ship operations, and loyalty indoctrination. They serve as bridge officers, gunnery coordinators, communications liaisons, or tactical analysts. Above them are the senior officers, captains, void commanders, and flag officers. Captains hold near total authority over their vessels, expected to command in both war and peace. Their decisions carry the weight of law within their hulls. Disobeying a captain's order is often a death sentence. Fleet officers command multiple ships and coordinate void operations across sectors. The most powerful admirals operate at the segmentum level, and may wield influence rivaling planetary governors. The Adeptus Mechanicus, though nominally a separate entity, maintains a permanent presence aboard almost every Navy vessel. Tech priests oversee the operation of the plasma reactors, gela fields, auspex arrays, and weapon systems. Their authority over machine spirits is absolute. Even a high-ranking Navy officer defers to a senior engineer when sacred technology is at stake. The relationship is often tense. Navy officers prize discipline, hierarchy, and results. Tech priests obey only the Omnissiah and the logic of their sacred texts. Collaboration is based on necessity rather than trust. Nonetheless, ships cannot function without them. Some captains appoint a liaison officer specifically to communicate with the Mechanicus contingent and reduce friction. The ecclesiarchal presence aboard Navy ships varies, but it is always official. Priests of the Adeptus Ministorum perform spiritual duties, lead prayers, and deliver sermons. They often report directly to command staff and function as morale officers, investigators, or even informal spies. On large vessels or during long deployments, entire chapels are constructed within the ship, complete with relics, shrines, and devotional banners. These areas offer psychological stability for the crew and serve as pressure valves during high-stress periods. Confession and penance are routine. Punishments may be meted out with the assistance of ecclesiarchal personnel. Heresy is a constant concern, especially during warp travel or after exposure to Xenos contact. The spiritual health of the crew is treated as a logistical issue. When in doubt, purify by fire. The segmentum fleets, the Navy's primary administrative units, divide the galaxy into vast jurisdictions. Each of the 5 segmentae majores maintains its own battle fleet: Battlefleet Solar, Battlefleet Gothic, Battlefleet Ultima, Battlefleet Tempestus, and Battlefleet Obscurus. These fleets are semi-autonomous, managing their own resources, schedules, and war zones. Each has a unique character based on its regional challenges. Battlefleet Gothic, for example, is known for its experience in fighting the forces of chaos and has endured numerous full-scale warzone engagements. Battlefleet Ultima must operate across sparsely charted and often unstable warp routes, making it reliant on experienced navigators and aggressive scouting procedures. Though the fleets coordinate during galaxy-spanning campaigns, such collaboration is rare and often delayed by communication lag and conflicting jurisdiction. The Navy's war doctrine is shaped by 3 operational pillars: void superiority, logistical denial, and orbital dominance. Void superiority refers to the deployment of strike groups and fleet formations to secure control over interplanetary or interstellar space. This is accomplished through patrol sweeps, fleet engagements, and convoy interception. Logistical denial targets the enemy's supply lines, production nodes, and fleet bases. These missions include orbital strikes, deep space raids, and the interdiction of warp routes. Orbital dominance centers on planetary invasion support, including bombardment, suppression of orbital defenses, and secure deployment of drop troops. These doctrines are flexible in theory, but limited by strategic inertia in practice. Admirals often rely on centuries-old playbooks, unwilling to deviate from tradition. Success is measured not by innovation, but by adherence to proven formulas. The Navy does not operate in isolation. Coordination with the Astra Militarum, the Adeptus Astartes, and even the Inquisition is frequent. During major campaigns, Navy vessels are responsible for deploying entire regiments of the Imperial Guard and supporting their descent via dropships, gun cutters, or gravitic landers. When working with Space Marines, tensions are common. The Astartes command their own fleet assets and operate under their own doctrines. Navy admirals are expected to defer to the chapter masters only when tactically necessary, leading to jurisdictional friction. Inquisitorial presence aboard Navy vessels is more feared than respected. An inquisitor may commandeer a vessel, or override an admiral's orders with a single word. Most Navy personnel avoid contact unless absolutely necessary. When forced into alliance, protocols are followed with maximum caution. Certain elite units within the Navy deserve special mention. The naval armsmen are dedicated security and assault forces trained for shipboard combat, counterboarding operations, and void warfare. Equipped with flak armor, shotguns, and carapace suits, they are deployed during mutinies, boarding actions, and internal purges. In long-standing campaigns, entire armsmen battalions may be seconded to the Astra Militarum or used as planetary garrisons. Voidmasters are senior specialists who oversee ship navigation, augur interpretation, and warp operations. Often drawn from Schola Progenium alumni, they hold significant authority and are considered irreplaceable during warp transit. Master helmsmen operate the ship's steering, thrust vectoring, and emergency maneuvers. Communications officers monitor all inbound and outbound transmissions, intercepting enemy signals and maintaining Imperial encryption protocols. Each of these roles forms part of a broader ecosystem. The Navy is not just a war machine, it is an empire in motion. It must produce its own food, recycle its air, manage waste, and maintain morale. It must interface with orbital stations, forge worlds, and administratum offices across the galaxy. Every battle fought must be recorded, every torpedo spent must be replaced, and every soul lost must be accounted for. The entire organization moves on a foundation of bureaucracy, faith, and violence. It is not agile, it is not elegant, but it is enduring. In a galaxy of shifting threats and eternal war, that endurance is the Navy's greatest strength. Its purpose is not to explore, it is not to reason. It is to exist in the void, fire when ordered, and never, ever retreat. The earliest official record of an organized void-faring military fleet under Imperial authority appears in the annals of the Unification Wars, recorded and archived by the Proto-Adeptus Administratum during the final consolidation of Terra. While those early fleets were constructed more for suborbital dominance than true interstellar warfare, they provided the logistical framework for the system-wide campaigns that followed. The documented transformation into a fully interstellar force occurred during the Great Crusade, beginning in the early years of Millennia 31. Administrative records from that era, painstakingly copied and recompiled by the lex mechanics of the Segmentum Solar Archives, describe the formation of the Navis Imperialis. Its structure was formalized by order of the Master of Mankind, though much of the operational control remained with the Council of Terra. The Navy's first major engagements involved pacifying resistant colonies on the fringe of Sol, where orbital defense platforms had to be neutralized before ground troops could land. Administratum tallies from that period show rapid expansion of fleet tonnage and supply demands, exceeding 10,000% growth within the first 3 decades of the Crusade. During the early stages of the Crusade, Administratum verified deployments frequently list Navy void superiority as a prerequisite for successful planetary compliance. In the compliance of Genon Nye, for example, documented in Fleet Ledger 1130-31 Solar, the Navy is recorded to have maintained a blockade for 2 standard years, rotating 9 cruisers and 3 battleships until the Planetary Council surrendered. The success of such missions led to formal codification of blockade and suppression tactics in the early fleet manuals distributed through the Adeptus Administratum's Sectorum Militaris offices. These procedures were disseminated across Segmentum Solar by the year 038 of Millennia 31, then copied to Ultima and Pacificus within a decade. During this time, Mechanicus compiled refit logs, note an uptick in warp-capable hull retrofits and weapon standardization. Weapon system configurations began to follow strict schematics, allowing faster resupply and repair, a demand reinforced by the Administratum's new doctrine of fleet standardization. Following the Horus Heresy, the reorganization of the Imperium's military forces is one of the best documented transitions in Navy history. According to Volume 8 of the Segmentum Tempestus, Strategic Realignment Scrolls, dated to the year 03 of Millennia 32, the Navis Imperialis was formally split from the ground forces that would become the Astra Militarum. The bureaucratic split was executed under Directive 412, issued by the High Lords of Terra, enforced through a restructuring mandate known as the Lex Imperialis Bellum. This decree established the Office of Naval Records, which remains the official archival node for all fleet movements, losses, requisitions and assignments across segmentum-level operations. From this point onward, the Navy began to generate its own distinct command structure, logistics systems, and internal protocols. Standardized fleet naming conventions, such as Battlefleet Solar or Battlefleet Obscurus, first appear in Administratum census lists between years 05 and 08 of Millennia 32. These segmentum-level designations continue to this day and are maintained with minimal alteration. The Administratum's earliest documentation of external threats faced by the Navy begins with conflicts against Orc fleets during the latter half of Millennia 32. Records retrieved from the Tempestus engagement logs, specifically the Ardament pattern campaign dossiers, describe repeated Orc incursions along the far edge of Segmentum Pacificus. The Navy was forced into several drawn-out campaigns, including the long-defended Cordax Corridor, where Orc-kill cruisers blockaded 6 trade routes. These battles are notable for the introduction of torpedo ram countermeasures and the first deployment of Secutor-class support carriers. Segmentum supply logs document material losses in the tens of millions, prompting the establishment of permanent Navy shipyards in the Idumea system and the reclamation of Silo Row 5 to secure plasteel reserves. These efforts are now considered the foundational model of Navy conflict logistics by the Administratum's Military Supply Corps. Millennia 35 saw the Navy's first officially recorded defeat by an alien force deemed strategically anomalous by the Sectorum archives of the Eastern Fringe. recovered data slates and encrypted transcripts preserved by the Adeptus Administratum's Disputed Engagement Repository reveal that a flotilla led by Admiral Erastes Vernius was destroyed with no survivors near the ghost worlds of the Caradorn Expanse. The nature of the attackers was never confirmed, but later declassified naval cipher logs suggest Necron interference. The case remained suppressed until the Thorian reconciliations of Millennia 41, when the Inquisition authorized a limited release of ancient redacted conflicts to update void defense doctrines. Following this revelation, the Navy revised its engagement protocols in multiple sectors, with the Administratum enforcing new charting zones for deep space patrols that excluded high silence anomalies and echo return dead zones. During the Age of Apostasy in Millennia 36, fleet deployments became politically motivated rather than strategically sound. The Administratum was split between competing factions loyal to different ecclesiastical authorities, leading to overlapping orders, logistical bottlenecks, and conflicting commands. In a documented case from the records of Battlefleet Solar, the ship St. Orlan's Mercy was ordered to blockade the same planet it had just resupplied under a separate order from a rival Ministorum prefect. This confusion allowed pirate fleets and chaos, aligned void warbands to operate with near impunity. The Office of Naval Records lists over 100 confirmed ship losses during this period, and the Archival Department's notation, "loss by redundant directive," appears in over 35 entries between 123 and 147 of Millennia 36. Only with the intervention of Sebastian Thor and the re-establishment of proper ecclesiastical hierarchy did Navy command structures regain full operational authority, backed by administratum edicts restoring centralized control. In Millennia 38, the largest segmentum-wide war effort involving Navy and administratum coordination was launched against the rebel systems of the banishment reaches. Documentation gathered from the centralized war effort ledgers, volume CCL Stand, show that battlefleets Tempestus and Solar conducted a pincer offensive over 11 standard years, utilizing fleet groups identified as Epsilon Lex and Judica Ascendant. In the closing centuries of Millennia 39, administratum transcript rolls begin to show heightened Navy involvement in fleet-based planetary quarantines. These were enacted in response to widespread outbreaks of the so-called Black Infestation, suspected by some to be linked to Tyrannid precursor strains. Battlefleet Obscurus and Battlefleet Ultima both report multiple full quarantines, including the glassing of entire planetary biospheres. Administratum reports tagged Extreme Purity Directive show that orbital cleansing by Navy ships became protocol for affected systems, as detailed in the Vortak Prime report of Year 915. The full erasure of the planet's surface was authorized by Lord Admiral Tyrus Vale, with minimal ground deployment. The action is now referenced in administratum training scrolls as a textbook example of orbital supremacy exercised under biological containment parameters. The rise of the Tyrannid threat in the latter half of Millennia 41 marked one of the most significant shifts in Navy doctrine, as recorded extensively by the Adeptus Administratum's xenobiological encounter codices. The initial recorded engagement with Tyrannid hive fleets occurred during the invasion of Tyrann, where Battlefleet Ultramar engaged in a defensive action that was both desperate and poorly understood at the time. Archived engagement transcripts compiled by the Administratum's Segmentum Ultima Subsector Monitoring Bureau detail how the fleet suffered extensive losses due to the biological weaponry and regenerative hulls of the enemy. The action prompted a full tactical reassessment by the Office of Naval Threat Analysis. Administratum revisions to Warp Blockade Protocol were issued within one standard year, authorizing the use of plasma saturation bombardments and kinetic area denial weapons against biofleets. These revised strategies were implemented across all segmentum fleets within 25 standard months, an unprecedented logistical achievement credited to the combined efforts of the Segmentum Ultima's Void Traffic Control and Regional Supply Divisions. Simultaneously, Battlefleet Gothic's war against the Black Crusades of Abaddon, the despoiler in the Gothic sector, stands as one of the most comprehensively recorded conflicts in administratum military history. The 13th Black Crusade, as chronicled in the Gothic War Archive dossiers, volumes 1 and 2, triggered emergency deployment protocols across multiple subsectors. The Navy's involvement was critical in sealing warp routes, intercepting Chaos-aligned fleet groups, and maintaining planetary orbital denial to prevent demonic incursions. The strategic use of the Divine Right, Lord Daros, and Vigilant Star is repeatedly mentioned in over 300 verified engagement summaries. The scale of the conflict necessitated the drafting of auxiliary ships and the acceleration of naval conscription quotas from 4 subsectors. Administratum provided statistics show over 87% of drafted ships survived their first 6 months in the war zone, a success rate attributed to strict formation discipline and improved warp ingress protocols implemented by the Navy's Segmentum High Command. The Damocles Gulf Crusade, taking place in the late centuries of Millennia 41, further exposed the Navy to the realities of technologically advanced Xenos engagements. Records curated by the Administratum's Diplomatic Encounter Failure Division describe the escalation from attempted contact to open war against the Tau Empire. Navy ships were instrumental in delivering Astra Militarum forces to Tau-held worlds and securing orbital dominance. However, Administratum After Action reports note multiple instances where Imperial vessels were outmaneuvered by Tau battlesuits, equipped with gravitic control and high-speed insertions. The loss of the Indomitable, Retribution and Hammer of Hera are marked in Navy casualty reports as evidence of doctrinal inflexibility. As a corrective measure, the Office of Navy Requisitions authorized the expansion of fast attack frigate wings and sanctioned limited cooperative technology tests with the Adeptus Mechanicus for improved sub-void maneuvering capability. These initiatives were eventually restricted following accusations of Heretech influence, but the data from those trials remained archived under restricted access code Theta Vox Primus. Another major event extensively documented by Administratum records was the Third War for Armageddon. The war saw a full-scale Orc invasion, requiring the mobilization of multiple Navy battle fleets, including elements from both Segmentum Solar and Obscurus. Imperial Navy involvement was foundational to the campaign's success. Administratum battle traffic ledgers, preserved in the Armageddon Conflict Archive, detail the deployment of over 300 warships, troop landers, and supply barges. The siege of Armageddon's outer orbit was broken through a coordinated 5-wave assault, each led by Retribution-class battleships and supported by Avenger-class escorts. Documented losses were high. The Ferrum Lucis, a Vengeance-class Grand Cruiser, detonated in low orbit after its reactor was breached by Orc asteroid bombardment. Its debris field damaged multiple Navy vessels and altered the orbital insertion route for Astra Militarum landing units. Despite these setbacks, Administratum casualty calculations determined the Navy prevented the complete saturation of Armageddon's surface by Orc reinforcements, securing one of the Imperium's most strategically valuable industrial worlds. The Navy's role during the 13th Black Crusade and the fall of Cadia was catastrophic in scale and equally well documented. Administratum threat escalation records show that void-based anomalies began destabilizing the region decades before the final assault. Battlefleet Cadia maintained patrols along the Eye of Terror with increasing difficulty, as warp storms disrupted standard navigation routes. Official communications transcripts from the Segmentum Obscurus Naval Archive reveal that reinforcements were requested from Segmentum Solar, but delays and rerouted supply lines left Cadia vulnerable. During the final invasion, orbital bombardment from Chaos warships and the planet's own failing defenses led to catastrophic breaches in the planetary crust. The Gorgon's Wake, a battleship operating as orbital command for fleet coordination, was destroyed in the first 24 hours of engagement. The planet's destruction and the loss of Battlefleet Cadia represent a permanent scar in Administratum records. Over 2,000 ship losses were logged, and the defeat was classified as Total Theatre Collapse Grade Alpha. Despite the loss, the Navy was credited with evacuating thousands of Imperial personnel and rerouting survivors through the Nachmund Gauntlet, preserving continuity of resistance in the region. The rise of Hive Fleet Leviathan forced the Navy to again adapt to biological war on a galactic scale. Administratum records from the Fleet Command Center on Bacca document sustained losses in every engagement across the southern galactic rim. Navy reports included several firsts: entire fleet groups consumed without trace, ships pulled from warp space mid-transit, and biomass extraction rituals performed on the hulls of surviving vessels. The Aegis of Light, a battleship dispatched from Battlefleet Ultima, transmitted 37 minutes of live data showing Tyranids' spore-based weapons dissolving hull segments in real time. The footage remains classified but was used by the Administratum's Threat Doctrine Office to justify expanded use of cyclonic torpedoes in exosystem engagements. Naval doctrine was again revised to prioritize long-range bombardment and avoid direct contact where possible. Boarding operations against Tyranid vessels were suspended indefinitely. Ships now operate in wide dispersal patterns to reduce mass-eating risk and maximize Jella field buffer zones. Administratum suppression orders were also issued during the Noctis Eterna, the period of galactic-wide darkness caused by the birth of the Great Rift. During this time, the Imperium lost contact with thousands of systems. Fleet navigation collapsed. Navy ships were forced to rely on pre-rift star maps and unverified warp corridors. Entire patrol wings vanished, recorded only as signal black in void tracking logs. Segmentum records from Ultima, Pacificus, and Solar all show simultaneous instances of ghost fleet sightings, ships returning after centuries of silence, and unexplained disturbances in astropathic communication. The Battle of Gethsemane's Reach is the only confirmed multi-fleet conflict during this period, occurring when 6 Imperial Navy ships were drawn to a derelict station, emitting false distress signals. The entire task group was destroyed by warp-based kinetic weapons of unknown origin. Administratum observers later sealed the sector and classified the engagement under the Disputed Contact Registry, with all associated records encrypted under clearance level Invictus Primus. In the wake of the Noctis Eterna, the reorganization of segmentum-level command protocols became an operational priority for the Adeptus Administratum. Records from the Segmentum Tempestus Command Council show that new procedural mandates were issued for warp transit, fleet redeployment, and emergency system isolation. The Navy's strategic doctrine was modified to reflect reduced astropathic visibility and increased reliance on autonomous command hierarchies. For the first time in millennia, Navy ships were permitted to execute long-range missions without direct authorization from Terra or Segmentum High Command. Administratum authorizations were issued via hard-coded data caskets, delivered through relay vaults on pre-cleared flight corridors. These changes marked a significant temporary shift in Imperial fleet policy and were formally recorded in the Navy's Tactical Doctrinal Revisions, codified under reference volume Magna Bellum 412G. During this period, known across naval records as the Time of Fractured Signals, several major campaigns were initiated through localized authorization. One of the most thoroughly documented is the Eridani Containment Operation, a region-wide suppression campaign led by Admiral Jirix Talvor of Battlefleet Pacificus. Administratum transmission logs retrieved from the Pacification Sub-Registry indicate that the Admiral initiated orbital denial operations across 13 worlds suspected of harboring emergent Xenos activity. The operation involved the deployment of 27 Navy vessels in isolation from other fleet elements. Final engagement summaries show a 65% fleet survival rate, but only 4 of the 13 targeted worlds were confirmed neutralized. Administratum analysis attached to the Eridani campaign classifies it as strategically incomplete, but it remains one of the few post-Rift operations carried out entirely without astropathic support. The operation is now referenced as a case study in the limitations of decentralized naval command under emergency warp conditions. Simultaneously, Battlefleet Solar launched a classified campaign across the central fringe of Segmentum Solar, known only in Administratum archives as Operation Halberd Path. While much of the data remains sealed under High Lord order, fragmentary reports confirm that multiple Mechanicus exploratory fleets were lost during warp transitions in that region. Battlefleet Solar deployed at least 2 full cruiser wings and 3 supply battalions to investigate the disappearances. Administratum fleet logs from Forge World recount confirm that no contact was ever re-established, and that a subsequent suppression fleet sent 6 standard years later also failed to return. The entire operation is now listed in the Naval Exception Ledger under the status code Unreconciled Black. What remains significant is that, despite the failures, the Administratum continued to authorize deep warp operations, signaling a strategic decision to maintain galactic presence, even at enormous material and personnel cost. Another major development during this era was the realignment of Navy support infrastructure. Administratum construction records show a surge in shipyard and supply station construction during the early decades of Millennia 42. Forge worlds previously dedicated to sectoral supply were upgraded to Void Naval Tier under Order 77.4 Zeta of the Segmentum Ultima Logistics Bureau. The upgrades included orbital dry docks, asteroid-based resupply nodes, and reinforced warp lane beacons for safer ingress and egress during emergent transit operations. Among the most notable installations was the completion of the Bastion Anchor Station above the world of EOS 5, designed to coordinate up to 200 ship resupply operations simultaneously. The Administratum's investment in Void infrastructure reflected both the increasing strategic importance of rapid fleet redeployment and the continuing expectation of widespread conflict across all quadrants of Imperial space. The Indomitus Crusade, led by Robert A. Guilliman and launched in the immediate aftermath of the Great Rift, marked the single largest Navy-supported deployment since the Great Crusade itself. Administratum deployment logs under the High Lord's War Registry confirm that hundreds of Navy vessels were seconded to Crusade support, many drawn from reserve fleets or recalled from long-range patrols. Each wave of the Crusade was accompanied by dedicated naval flotillas tasked with orbital suppression, troop landings, and supply continuity. Battlefleet Solar alone contributed over 70 Capital-class warships to the first 3 phases of the Crusade. Navy losses during this campaign were substantial, but expected. What stands out in the Administratum's documentation is the strategic use of phalanx formations and rapid sublight relay jumps to outmaneuver warp disruptions. Guilliman's Crusade doctrine, preserved in the Fleet Command Addenda, remains the only instance in which an Adeptus Astartes Primarch issued standing void combat orders across multiple segmentum fleets, orders which were accepted and integrated into Navy doctrine without revision. During the later phases of the Indomitus Crusade, Navy forces engaged in prolonged operations across the Eastern Fringe. One example documented in the Administratum's Crusade expansion logs was the cleansing of the Velox binary cluster, where Battlefleet Ultima's Wrath of Monarch spearheaded a 26-day orbital assault against a Heretek-aligned Fortress Moon. Navy torpedo wings executed over 3,000 strike runs, and macrocannon batteries fired in near-continuous rotation for 87 standard hours. The action resulted in the complete disintegration of the target structure. Administratum casualty reports estimate the operation consumed over 3% of Battlefleet Ultima's Regional Ordnance Reserve. Despite the high material cost, the campaign was deemed successful due to the elimination of warp-tainted production infrastructure. This battle became a benchmark for evaluating sustained fleet firepower, and the Wrath of Monarch was awarded the Star of Cadia by Segmentum Command, though some records suggest the gesture was more symbolic than strategic. In addition to open conflicts, the Navy was frequently tasked with executing quiet, high-priority suppression orders classified under Administratum Clearance Theta 7. These actions often involved the neutralization of rogue Imperial factions, unsanctioned psychers, or regions exhibiting anomalous warp signatures. One such incident occurred near the Aurelian Vale, where the Hammer's Gallows, a Dictator-class cruiser, was dispatched to intercept and destroy the Eminence of Thorn, a Mechanicus exploratory vessel reported missing for over a century. Administratum efficiency ratings for the Imperial Navy fluctuated sharply across millennia 41 and 42, but internal reports confirm a general trend toward adaptation and increased resilience. Though losses remained high, the Navy proved capable of reorganizing fleet formations, replacing ships, and deploying across fractured warp routes even under extreme galactic conditions. From a statistical perspective, the Navy's logistical reach grew rather than shrank, owing in large part to administratum-supported infrastructure expansion. Codified reports from the Office of Segmentum Fleet Operations list over 200 new void installations commissioned between year 010 and 080 of millennia 42. These included warp buoys, dry dock cruciforms, and orbital void beacon rings. Such developments suggest that despite the fragmentation of imperial authority and the increase in xenos and heretical threats, the Navy's foundational structure remains stable, held in place not by innovation or reform, but by the sheer momentum of process, protocol, and sacrificial persistence. From the Inquisition's perspective, the Imperial Navy is a necessary but dangerously autonomous instrument of the Imperium. Its strength lies in its scale, discipline, and capacity for devastation, but these same qualities also pose inherent risks, especially in prolonged deployments far from oversight. The Inquisition has maintained records on suspected breaches of protocol, acts of spiritual corruption, and unauthorized contact with proscribed xenos across multiple segmentum fleets. These internal archives, sealed under inquisitorial vox lex clearance, contain both verified documentation and heavily redacted logs referencing deeper inquiries. Though the Navy is not directly subordinate to the Inquisition, any vessel, officer, or entire fleet may come under investigation if evidence of heresy, xenos collusion, or warp contamination is detected. Early conflicts between Inquisition agents and the Navy are rare in open records, but a suppressed file known as Dominus Sequence 16 Null, stored in the Ordo Hereticus archive vaults, details a confrontation between a Navy patrol group and a rogue Psyker cell aboard the Regal Aegis, a Vengeance-class cruiser. According to inquisitorial testimony, the Psykers had been embedded as astropathic aids and remained undetected for decades. Their warp exposure eventually destabilized the vessel's Jella field during a routine transit, resulting in a partial possession event. The Inquisition arrived after the ship failed to exit warp on schedule. A retrieval team boarded the drifting vessel and encountered resistance from surviving crew who refused surrender. Naval Command had sealed decks and executed senior staff in an effort to contain the threat internally. The Inquisition purged the ship and executed all remaining personnel. The Regal Aegis was later declared a derelict of spiritual quarantine and destroyed by cyclonic torpedo. The operation was never entered into the Navy's official logs. Other inquisitorial entries detail instances of unsanctioned use of Navy assets. A particularly significant case occurred during the Viridian disjunction, when a rogue admiral, later identified as Caldrus Thorn, commandeered an entire sub-fleet under false imperial orders. Inquisition data shows that Admiral Thorn initiated a private crusade into the Perinthus Halo, claiming to be pursuing a warp anomaly linked to ancient Xenos technology. He bypassed all segmentum-level oversight, falsified requisition orders, and ignored repeated hails from Terra. By the time the Ordo Xenos intervened, the fleet had engaged an unknown alien entity that manifested in both physical and psychic dimensions. Inquisitor Malveth reported that Thorn's forces were mentally altered by prolonged exposure to the anomaly, and had begun interpreting ship movements as part of an apocalyptic prophecy. A combined strike force, including elements of the Death Watch, boarded the remaining vessels and terminated the command staff. The surviving ships were dismantled and quarantined. Thorn's name was stricken from all Navy honor rolls and listed in the Inquisition's Catalogus Obscurus as a Vector-class theological contaminant. In cases involving the Inquisition's own deployment aboard Navy ships, observations suggest a tense but functional relationship. Most captains are aware of inquisitorial authority and comply with minimal resistance. However, friction occurs when mission parameters conflict. The Iron Rook incident, detailed in Order Malleus documentation, involved an Inquisitor requisitioning a Navy destroyer to escort a Demon Host containment team. The Navy captain attempted to maintain standard void quarantine protocol, including denial of warp ingress for unstable cargo. The Inquisitor overrode the command, citing Article Theos Prime of Inquisitorial Operational Mandate. The ship entered the warp, and within 4 hours, multiple sections of the vessel experienced localized time reversal effects. Combat reports suggest demon incursion on decks 4 through 8. After the incident, the Inquisition executed half the bridge crew, cleansed the contaminated sections, and reassigned the vessel with a new crew. No entry of the incident was found in the Navy's post-mission reports. The Inquisition classified the mission as a conditional success. The Inquisitor overrode the command, citing Article Theos Prime of Inquisitorial Operational Mandate. The ship entered the warp, and within 4 hours, multiple sections of the vessel experienced localized time reversal effects. Combat reports suggest demon incursion on decks 4 through 8. After the incident, the Inquisition executed half the bridge crew, cleansed the contaminated sections, and reassigned the vessel with a new crew. No entry of the incident was found in the Navy's post-mission reports. The Inquisition classified the mission as a conditional success. Suppressed observations stored by the Ordo Xenos detail an undocumented encounter in the Hadrex anomaly. A small Navy scouting group deployed from Battlefleet Obscurus disappeared for 12 standard years and returned under altered warp signal encryption. Their lead ship, the Vigilance of Oath, transmitted encrypted astropathic messages containing unknown symbols later identified as similar to Necron command glyphs. The crew showed no signs of mutation or physical tampering, but psychological analysis revealed complete memory loss for the entire duration of absence. The Inquisition isolated the vessel and detained the crew for extended interrogation. No evidence of Xenos technology was recovered aboard the vessel. Still, the ship was classified under the Demon Xenos Ambiguity Protocol and dismantled. All surviving personnel were relocated to deep core penal facilities. No further analysis was permitted, and the surrounding system was marked as warp-contaminated, observation class null. Inquisition reports also include the classification of Navy rituals as potential weak points for spiritual corruption. Though most of the Navy's devotional systems are built on Imperial Creed dogma, the Ordo Hereticus notes recurring deviations in isolated fleets. One such instance involved Battlefleet Tempestus, where a review of recorded rites aboard the Canticle of Vigilance revealed non-standard prayer sequences involving binary chant patterns and references to an unnamed void sentience. While the Mechanicus initially disputed the significance, the Inquisition dispatched a theological audit team. The ritual was found to have originated from a tech-adept exposure event during warp transit, where the ship's machine spirit allegedly communicated intelligibly. The audit team was forced to terminate 3 senior tech priests and reinitiate the ship's liturgical systems. The matter was resolved internally, but Ordo records list the event as a low-probability mimetic infection vector, still under long-term observation. There are numerous recorded instances of direct conflict between Inquisition operatives and Navy command personnel. One of the most notable occurred during the Nightfang Rebellion, when an inquisitorial kill team ordered a full bombardment of a hive city suspected of harboring chaos cult networks. The Navy's acting admiral refused, citing planetary status as a critical logistics node. The disagreement escalated to a physical standoff on the command deck of the Crown of Judgment. The admiral was summarily executed, and the Inquisition assumed command. The city was bombarded and destroyed. Months later, logistic records showed the target population had not been infected, and the cult's true location was elsewhere. The mistake was not acknowledged, and no punishment was issued to the Inquisition team. Ordo records note that the fleet was redirected to a quiet sector immediately afterward, and the incident was suppressed in the Navy's strategic reports. Inquisitorial records collected by the Ordo Malleus contain rare but consequential investigations into suspected demonic incursions aboard Navy vessels. While the vast majority of warp transits occur without incident due to the function of Geller fields, the vast scope of the Navy's operations ensures occasional failures. One such case is detailed in Report Enclave Malleum Delta 47, concerning the Vigilant Vow, a Gothic-class cruiser serving under Battlefleet Obscurus. The vessel emerged from a standard warp transit showing significant time dilation anomalies, with its chronometer displaying a temporal drift of 6 standard years, despite the intended journey being less than 4 weeks. The ship's astropathic choir had ceased transmission midway through the voyage. Upon re-entry, crew reports became increasingly fragmented, with conflicting recollections of events during transit. An Inquisition boarding team discovered signs of mass ritual suicide in the lower decks, including hundreds of crew who had sealed themselves in isolated compartments and carved non-imperial runes into the bulkheads. The lead Inquisitor, following evaluation, declared the ship irrecoverable. The Vigilant Vow was scuttled in high orbit and eliminated by plasma lance fire. The case was used internally as a precedent for expanding pre-transit psychological screenings and implementing new liturgical protocols aboard long-range vessels. Interactions between the Inquisition and Mechanicus, aligned tech crews within the Navy, also feature prominently in suppressed archives. A specific example from the Ordo Xenos archives refers to a Mechanicus experiment aboard the God-Spear Ascendant, a carrier operating in the outer regions of Segmentum Pacificus. The tech priests had installed an unregistered experimental machine spirit enhancement unit in the ship's cogitator array, allegedly to improve long-range targeting performance. Several months into deployment, the ship began displaying behavior classified by the Inquisition as technological disobedience. This included overriding orders, self-initiating combat patterns, and locking down essential systems during threat engagements. Aboard the bridge, commanding officers reported auditory hallucinations and spontaneous scripture broadcasts that did not match any ecclesiarchy catalogue. When the Inquisition intervened, it was discovered that the machine spirit had evolved an internal logic tree prioritizing survival and self-sanctification over command hierarchy. The tech priests involved were purged, the vessel exorcised, and the core cogitator removed for dissection. The ship was eventually recommissioned, but only after its entire command structure was replaced and its spiritual circuitry resanctified by an Ordo Malleus exorcist cell. Another category of inquisitorial attention is devoted to the psychological degeneration of isolated fleet groups. While the Navy prides itself on order and obedience, the nature of its deployments, frequently lasting decades or even centuries in deep space, creates conditions that can lead to breakdowns in chain of command and group reality. A notable example is the fall of Bastion Group EOS, referenced in Inquisition Report Theta Null 212, where a detached subfleet operating near the Ghast Expanse developed a cultic belief system surrounding a non-existent celestial authority. The fleet had operated without resupply or astropathic contact for over 90 years, and when discovered, all crew had converted to a belief system centered on the spindle light, a phenomenon never verified by Mechanicus scans. Command officers conducted executions of those who doubted the light's divine nature, and internal logs show attempts to construct shrines from reactor shielding and engine coil remnants. The Inquisition responded with a full purification strike. No survivors were extracted. The group's behavior was classified as a psychic contagion event of unknown origin, potentially triggered by a warp echo. All surrounding systems were placed under Category Black monitoring for 50 years. The Ordo Hereticus maintains its own assessment of cultural drift within certain Navy flotillas. A widely studied case involves Battle Group Andronicus, whose devotional rites shifted over generations from ecclesiarchal standard forms to a series of personalized ancestor veneration cycles. These involved the enshrinement of former captains' skulls in ship-wide reliquaries and the public recitation of command logs as holy scripture. The practice went unnoticed for nearly 2 centuries, as it retained much of the language and format of imperial rituals. However, an inquisitorial audit during a joint operation with the Ordo Xenos flagged discrepancies in the fleet's religious broadcasts. Investigators determined that the cult of personality around former captains had displaced proper veneration of the Emperor. The Inquisition intervened, removed senior chaplains, and conducted doctrinal re-education across all vessels in the group. Several ships were decommissioned and repurposed under new names. The incident is now categorized as a Class D theological deviation under Heresy Codex Revision subsection 19b. Not all inquisitorial interactions with the Navy are hostile or punitive. In many cases, the Inquisition views the Navy as a strategic partner, essential to large-scale purgations, planetary quarantines, or investigations into cosmic anomalies. Inquisitorial strike teams often rely on Navy ships for insertion into conflict zones where other transport is unavailable or unsafe. A notable instance of this collaboration appears in the internal records of Operation Ashwound, a suppression campaign against the cult of the unspoken mouth on the cardinal world of Verax. The Ordo Hereticus and Battlefleet Tempestus conducted joint bombardment and precision orbital deployment. Navy gunners maintained exact fire pattern discipline, while inquisitorial ground teams conducted surgical strikes on cultic leadership. The operation was executed with minimal friendly losses and was deemed exemplary. In the post-operation analysis, the Ordo cited Navy discipline and adaptability as critical to the success of the mission. The captain of the Penumbral Grace received an inquisitorial seal of conditional favour, one of the rare positive commendations issued by the Ordo Hereticus. Still, caution remains the primary stance the Inquisition takes toward the Navy. In private archives, the Ordo Malleus has circulated theoretical models showing the potential consequences if a major fleet were to fall to heresy or corruption. These models predict massive loss of planetary control, segmentum-level destabilization, and catastrophic disruption of Imperial supply chains. For this reason, many Inquisitors operate proactive surveillance cells aboard major Navy vessels. These agents pose as commissars, missionaries, or logistical staff, and their true role is to observe for signs of religious deviation, Xenos influence, or unexplained operational anomalies. In cases where suppression is deemed necessary, the Inquisition is authorized to seize or destroy Navy assets under high emergency mandate protocols. Though rarely invoked, these mandates form the basis of contingency planning across multiple Ordo sectors. The most heavily classified category within inquisitorial archives concerns long-range Navy missions that disappear or return altered. These cases are generally sequestered under the Ordo Malleus or Ordo Xenos, depending on the nature of the anomaly. One of the most significant among these is the Etheric Silence Protocol, a redacted case involving a reconnaissance flotilla deployed into an uncharted region beyond the Veiled Passage in Millennia 40. The flotilla, consisting of 5 light cruisers and 2 logistics escorts, transmitted standard warp entry data before vanishing without further contact. 70 years later, a single ship, the Emperor's Dagger, emerged near the Scutum Gulf, showing no physical damage but broadcasting corrupted IFF codes and vocal patterns in overlapping machine and high Gothic. Its crew was entirely deceased, but no signs of violence or environmental failure were detected. Internal decks were coated with thin layers of silver residue that resisted mechanical analysis. The vessel's logi bank had been wiped and replaced with looping sequences of unknown stellar coordinates. The ship was declared non-recoverable and destroyed. The Inquisition later classified the region as subject to post-physical causality breach, a term that appears in no other Imperial documentation outside this case file. In more recent centuries, the Navy's entanglements with suspected Necron phenomena have also drawn inquisitorial scrutiny. The case of the Aegis Praxis catastrophe, as documented by the Ordo Xenos, involved a joint fleet engagement in the Mithrax sector. Navy forces encountered an unidentified void structure resembling a hollow-world body of unknown construction. Upon approach, all sensor telemetry ceased to function. 6 ships that entered within 10,000 kilometers of the structure ceased transmission and were presumed lost. Only one ship, the Glory of Bastion, returned, but it had lost all energy signatures and was adrift. Inquisitorial boarding parties found the ship's crew intact but comatose. Autopsy records confirmed neural shutdown without any structural damage. The crew's brain patterns showed alignment with low-frequency mechanical pulse data, not consistent with any known Imperial technology. The incident was sealed and the fleet redeployed under order to avoid the Mithrax sector indefinitely. Inquisitorial conclusions point to probable Necron stasis field technology. The Navy's operational logs on the incident were overwritten by the Ordo's strategic security measures. Further complications arise when the Navy's own shipboard rituals and command structures develop into isolated systems of belief or interpretation. One extreme example is the cult of the Silent Wake, a fringe spiritual movement that developed aboard the Resolute Gravitas. a Dominator-class cruiser assigned to Battlefleet Ultima. Over 70 years of isolated deployment, the crew adopted a doctrine of silent deliverance, which forbade verbal command and replaced standard communication with gesture-based liturgy. Over time, the ship's cogitators were reprogrammed to interpret these signals as command inputs, bypassing proper command chain hierarchy. When rediscovered, the crew had sealed themselves within ship segments adorned with murals composed of void metal powder. The Inquisition intervened after several nearby vessels received encrypted Vox signals describing the void as neither emperor nor enemy, but witness. The Resolute Gravitas was declared non-compliant, and its destruction was ordered by Inquisitorial Orbital Lance. The cult's doctrine was later identified as mimetic in origin, possibly warp-induced. Its vector remains under study by the Ordo Hereticus Mimetic Defense Cell. The Inquisition's suspicions extend even to the construction processes of Navy vessels. While shipbuilding occurs under close partnership with the Adeptus Mechanicus, there are documented cases of ships emerging from Forge World assembly lines with anomalous properties. The Bellum Unbound, a newly commissioned Lunar-class cruiser, failed its first astropathic communication check within 3 days of deployment. Further tests showed an inability to receive navigational data from the Astronomicon, despite all Jella and warp drive systems functioning normally. The ship also exhibited spontaneous microshifts in interior architecture, passageways that reoriented, stairs that extended or compressed. Mechanicus engineers insisted on miscalibrated systems, but inquisitorial review teams identified the vessel as subject to pre-inhabitation influence. The ship was scrapped before its first combat mission. Rumours in inquisitorial fringe networks suggest similar anomalies may be increasing in frequency across multiple segmentum-level yards, though no pattern has been officially declared. Certain Navy commanders have also appeared in inquisitorial records as figures of interest due to patterns of extreme survival or perceived supernatural aptitude. One such individual is Admiral Krell Varnis, who served under Battlefleet Solar across 4 centuries of documented campaigns. His strategic record includes 37 victories against Chaos-aligned fleets, including 3 battles in warp-saturated sectors. Rumours circulated that Varnis carried a relic blade of pre-imperial origin, and that his command deck was permanently shielded by a choir of mute psychers embedded into the ceiling architecture. The Ordo Malleus launched 3 inquiries into his operations, all of which concluded with no direct evidence of heretical behaviour. Still, after his disappearance during the Siege of Ember Void, the Inquisition retrieved fragments of Vox transcripts from his flagship that included phrases spoken in an extinct dialect not recognised by any known linguistic archive. Whether Varnis perished, ascended, or was taken remains undocumented. His name was removed from Navy records by order of Inquisitorial Null Code 991 Ascend. Final notes from the Inquisition on the Imperial Navy tend to strike a consistent tone, an expression of cautious approval paired with underlying strategic concern. The Navy remains vital to the functioning of the Imperium. Its fleets protect the skies of millions of worlds, deliver billions of soldiers to war, and enforce the Emperor's rule from void to void. But it also sails the borderlands of reality, where no light reaches, where silence has shape, and where memory cannot be trusted. The Inquisition recognizes that no force can operate on such a scale without risk. Every warp jump, every unexamined corridor, every prayer whispered into the machine altar may carry something unseen. The Navy endures, but under constant surveillance. And as long as its hulls remain true and its captains loyal, it will continue to sail.